It was just the early days of cable, and our thought was we were going to do MTV of the movies.
This episode is brought to you by Tang and Java.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Chat with Mick. And today we have Larry Namer. He's the co-founder of E! Entertainment Television. He's a global media visionary whose influence extends beyond Hollywood. And today we're going to talk about legacy, storytelling, and what it takes to build something long-lasting. Hi Larry, how are you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much for being with us here today. And I know you've built networks and you have influence that extends far beyond Hollywood. But what is the one story that only you can tell?
Oh, God, there's so many. We don't want to get into when O.J. Simpson and I were going to beat each other over baseball bats, but
that would be a good story to tell.
It's a good one. Actually, it's I wrote this book last year, and it's like the story that everybody loves there. But when Alan and I had the idea, it was, everybody told us, they said, you can't start a TV network. Only big media companies start TV networks. You had to be Fox or Disney or something, and we weren't smart enough to listen. And we ended up, back then it was somewhere between $60 and $100 million to start a TV network. Mm-hmm. Everything was expensive and stuff, and we weren't smart enough to listen. We raised like $2 million, and we had a friend teaching radio, television, film at University of Texas in Austin, and I called him up and said, "Do you have kids who need summer intern jobs?" And so he said, "Yeah, they had trouble placing," and he sent 31 kids from Texas at the beginning of the summer, and he wanted to kill me because once we went on the air, we grew so quickly, and everybody said, "Oh God, why didn't you tell us that's what you wanted to do? We would have given you that money years ago." Half of the kids, they started as interns, and by the end of the summer, they were vice presidents. Mm-hmm. And people don't really understand that he didn't start from a big media company. It's still the only global TV network that's ever started by people, mm-hmm, as opposed to companies. And now it is, by far the largest influence of pop culture in the world. I mean, we're 142 countries.
That is amazing. When you were a child, did you ever think that you were going to go into something global that will support a lot of people globally?
No. I mean, the thought never popped in my... my parents were immigrants. We lived in Brooklyn, and what's still the hood, in Coney Island. It's not been gentrified yet. And... but we didn't know we were poor because everybody around us, we were all the same. So, but no, my parents' aspiration for their children was get a civil service job, be able to retire at 65 and have security. Mm-hmm. In a million years, being an entrepreneur was not, something that I thought about.
When did you realize that you had a different mindset than your parents?
I ended up getting a job. I was the first kid to go to college, mm-hmm, and I had a degree in economics. I quickly learned that there weren't a lot of jobs for economists out there. So I ended up getting what I thought was going to be a temporary summer job working in Manhattan in the sewers, putting cable wires together. They just organized cable TV. And so I did that, and I kind of rose up the ranks, and and then I got recruited to come out and build the big cable system in the San Fernando Valley. I was 30 years old, and it was crazy. But, when the company moved back to Canada, the company I worked for, my friend Alan and I just said, we got to think of something to stay in California. We like the warm weather, and So, it was just the early days of cable, and our thought was we were going to do MTV of the movies. And we thought we were smart, but took years to raise even 10 cents. And like I said, we couldn't raise anywhere near the amount of money needed. But, as soon as we went on the air, it became a global hit. I mean, the first year we were in 14 different countries. And, just the growth path. I mean, everything happened so quick that you really never had time to think back on it. I mean, we grew from 11 employees to 1,100 employees in 3 years. It was nuts.
Oh, wow. Let's take the time to go back to what life was like in Brooklyn. What lessons did you learn from your parents?
Well, first, work ethic. I mean, in my parents' world, they, at 12, kids don't go to summer camp, they work. So literally, I worked since I'm 12, and even when the school year was on, you went to school and you had an after-school job, and, that's the way it was. So you really learned hard work. My dad drove a Pepsi Cola truck, and, you lift the cases and you bring them down basements. And so, 12 years old, I'm lifting cases and doing physical labor and stuff. So there was nothing that scared me away when I took the job with the cable company thinking it was whatever. I mean, literally, you go down under the streets of Manhattan with the roaches and the rats, and, it was just like a job.
Did you feel like you missed out on a lot of things other kids were doing back then? Or did you think you'll work, and then you'll relax later?
No, I mean, because the neighborhood I grew up in, we were all the same. I mean, so even though I could look back now and say, boy, were we poor, we didn't think of it then. Just everybody kind of grew up the same and stuff. And, so there was no understanding that there was more out there. Until I kind of got in high school, then I started to say, wait a second, these kids are doing more than I ever did. And then certainly in college, that all changed then. I realized there was a bigger world.
What other challenges did you have as a child of immigrant parents back in Brooklyn?
Well, I mean, like I say, my parents, their aspiration for the children was, get a civil service job. And even after, I mean, it's interesting because even after E started, I mean, and again, we were, an overnight success that took years to build. My mom would come out. My dad had passed. My mom would come out, and she never grasped how big that thing got. I mean, it's the valuation is over $7 billion and stuff. I mean, it gets to the point where you can't even count the zeros. But my mom would come out. She'd knock on my bedroom door at 6 o'clock in the morning and go, "What time do you need to be up for work?" And she's like, "Oh, you see, you have nothing to do all day. If you were to listen to me and you got a job working for the city in accounting, you'd just be able to go to an office every day." She never quite got it.
It was about hard work and grit and the dedication needed to get something done, right? Moving forward, when you got your degree in economics, how did you end up that job with the cable company?
Well, I knew someone. I tried to get a job as using my degree, and I couldn't get one. So I knew someone who was in the electrical workers union, and I was telling them I wanted a summer job, and he said, "Yeah, we just organized this thing. It's cable TV. I don't know if anybody will ever pay for television, but here's the phone number of the shop steward. Go tell him the union sent you." So I went there, and they gave me a job. I mean, I wasn't even the splicer. I was the assistant underground splicer at $90 a week. And I very quickly, I learned how to use all the equipment. And then, like, the people who were running it would go, "Hey, kid, how do you know how to use all the equipment? You've been here for a month, and people takes them a year to learn it." And I was like, I read the instruction booklet. It wasn't like rocket science. And so I went from being an assistant underground splicer then I was the splicer. And then they kind of moved me up to being a construction guy and an installer and a service guy. And so I worked my way up really, really quick through the operation side of their business. So nothing to do with programming and nothing to do with finance or anything. All having to do with the wire. And, and then, Time Inc. bought the company. Time was a magazine company then, a publishing company. And they were doing their first contract, their labor contract. And the head of the union said, "Hey, kid, you know how to read and write. We will put you on the negotiating committee." I was 23 years old. And I'm like, this is really bizarre being on the negotiating committee. And we did a successful contract. And then after that, the union folks came to me and said, "We love what you did. We're making you the vice chairman of the cable TV workers." I'm like,
Wow.
I'm 23 years old and I'm a vice chairman of a labor union. And, and then when Time Inc. put in like one of their golden boys as the president, he realized that he could talk to me about, because I know how to read a balance sheet. So I was a technician who knew finance. And, finally the guy said to me, he goes, "Look, we really want you to come into management." And I'm like, "Nah, I don't want to do that." And so far, they finally convinced me to move into management. So they made me the director of operations of Manhattan Cable, the biggest cable company in the country. I was 25 years old. I had over 300 people reporting to me, all of which were older than me, which created some interesting management dynamics. But yeah, so I grew up in that era. And then what happened was all the big cities in the country started thinking that cable TV is more than just good reception. And they all wanted cable. But the big cities didn't want cable to be built on telephone poles, because a lot of them don't even have telephone poles. They wanted it all to go underground. So the only person around who knew how you build underground cable systems was me. And so a Canadian company won the franchise for LA, and they tried to recruit me, and I kept saying, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to La La Land." And, because you're a Brooklyn kid and all you hear is like, bad stuff about cults and all kinds of other stuff. And finally, the chairman of the company called me and said, "Hey, we really want to talk to you." And I said, "I'm not interested in that job." And I said, "There's no way I'm ever moving to California." And finally he said, "Well, do you have a girlfriend?" I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, I fly you both out to LA. I put you in the Bel Air Hotel. I give you a limo for the weekend. I want an hour of your time." And I said, "As long as you understand that there's no way that I'm going to take that job." And he goes, "Yeah." So anyway, I came out, I did the interview, and he, and I was like a real ass. I'm like, "Okay, you got an hour. Yeah, you got 58 minutes left." And finally at the end he said, "Well, what would it take for you to move out here?" So I said, I just made up like 4 times what I make in New York. And I found out that, Liberace, who was a big celebrity at the time, was moving from his house in L.A. to Las Vegas. I said, "I want Liberace's house. I want a car with a mobile phone." It was even before cell phones. And he just looked at me and said, "You're out of your mind." And I went, "Exactly." I said, "I told you there was no way I want this job." I went back to New York, and, New York in the winter is interesting. It's, when it first snows, for the first hour, it's pretty, but then it becomes black slush. So, one day I'm walking to the office and I got my suit on. I think I look really good. And a cab comes by and splashes me with like this black gook. And I'm like, what am I doing here?
Did you get tired of the snow right there and then?
I was like, I'm going, you know what? That California thing is looking better and better. And then I came in the office and the assistant said, "Oh, that guy from Canada is calling you all the time." I said, "I get him on the phone." So, he gets on the phone. He goes, "Look, what you asked for is ridiculous, but okay, when can you be here?" And I'm like, now I got my foot in my mouth. So that was kind of how I ended up in California.
With all of that, you were very young and you rose up the ranks. Did you ever think that you had an aptitude for leadership? You were really good with relationship building at that point because you were handling more than 300 workers under you.
No, well, growing up where I did in that environment, the neighborhood was, we were all poor. Looking back, we realized that. We didn't think we were poor then. It was very, multicultural, multiracial. I think in Coney Island where I grew up, it was, it was like 50-something% Puerto Rican, like 30% African American, and the rest was either Chinese or Caucasian and stuff. So, but you played in the street, everybody was your friend. So you just really never thought about some of the issues I think a lot of folks have today. And so it was a great environment to grow up in because it really prepared you for living a diverse life.
When you moved to LA, what was the difference between New York, the life that you were used to your new life in LA?
Well, when in New York, I would get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to go to the office, and work ethic was incredibly different. When I came out to California, I go to the office of the cable company, and and I introduce myself, and I say to the person who was going to be my assistant, I go, "Where is everybody?" She said, "I don't know. It's a nice day. Maybe they're at the beach." I'm like, "What do you mean? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Where are they?" He goes, "Well, after they go to the beach, they'll come to work." And I'm like, "Okay, this is certainly different." So a lot of difference in work ethic and just aspirations. Everybody out here, it's one of the only cities of size that's controlled by a single industry. I mean, you're either in the entertainment business or your neighbors are or something. I mean, it's really dominated. It's kind of like Detroit dominated by the auto business. So that was really different. So in New York, your neighbors could be in finance, they could be in publishing, they could be in anything. In LA, you could pretty well assume everybody's somehow related to media and entertainment.
What was the impetus for you to want to start thinking about having your own cable network?
Well, so I worked for the cable company, and they were out of Toronto. It was a Canadian company. And they ended up selling out. And they said, "Okay, Larry, we need you to come back to Toronto with us." And I'm like, no. I said, I didn't go from Brooklyn to LA to go to Toronto. I said, I'm done with the cold. So me and my friend Alan, Alan was also from the East Coast, we just started playing around with ideas. So we got to think of something that we could do. And, it was the early days of cable. So it's like when MTV really had music videos. Mm-hmm. And, we're going, when I had the cable company, one of the things I did, I called the studios and said, "Hey, I want to be on the list because everybody I know goes to the parties and the premieres and all that." And they went, "Nah, you're like you're a utility. You're like the gas company. We're not inviting you." So finally, I met someone from, I'm pretty sure it was Universal, in the marketing department. I said, "I don't understand this. The most effective vehicle you have for marketing a movie is a movie trailer. But the only time I ever see a movie trailer is when I'm in the movies." I said, "Wouldn't you want people to see that when they're in their home to make them want to go to the movies?" And he said, "Yeah, but we can't afford it." Mm-hmm. I said, "Okay, great." I said, "I have 61 channels. I don't know what I'm going to put on 61 channels." Because, again, there weren't 61 channels in existence. And I said, "You give me the movie trailers. I'll put them on TV. You put me on those party lists." And they went, "Yeah, sure." So they would send us movie trailers. And I hired a kid to edit them together. But then when we started doing audience surveys, what's your favorite channel? They go, "Oh, I love CNN, I love ESPN, I love that trailer channel." And I'm going, wait a second, I'm getting the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie. Then movies are only 50. And people love it. So when the company moved back and Al and I were thinking of things to do, he said, I'm always wondering why, nobody's done what MTV has done in music, why somebody hasn't done it with film. Mm-hmm. And I said, wait a second. I said, MTV stands a host in front of a green screen, and he goes, and Madonna has a new video. I said, we could stand a host in front of a green screen and say, and Schwarzenegger has a new movie. We thought it was literally that simple. We didn't realize that we pitched over 100 companies on investing in it. And everybody go, look, you're not Rupert Murdoch, you're not Ted Turner, you're not Disney, and you're not Fox. You can't start a TV. People don't start TV networks. And we literally went 3.5 years with just pitching. And finally we met someone who was willing to give us $2.5 million. And, I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that? I said, it costs like a lot more. And he said, well, that's all I'm allowed to sign for. So we just took it. But it really is a good example of how necessity is the mother of invention. Because we didn't have a lot of money. We had to be really smart about where we spent that 2.5. And, people even to this day, people who remember early E, which was called Movie Time when we started it, they said you were so lucky you had all those great hosts. I mean, when you think about it, we had Greg Kinnear, went on Academy Award, Greg Kinnear. Julie Moran became the first woman to do Wide World of Sports and then Entertainment Tonight. Suzanne Kay, was doing Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And, but that was not an accident. We realized that with limited amount of money, the smartest thing we could do is how we picked those hosts. So even though we had 5 hosts that all went on to do bigger and better stuff, we put over 7,000 people on tape. Then we used tape to pick those 5 hosts. So we put our money in the right place, and people loved those hosts and stuff. And because we didn't have a lot of money, we couldn't even buy like broadcast level cameras. I bought cameras and equipment from a company that was using that was doing sales training tapes. It was like 3/4 inch. It wasn't even real broadcast stuff. But when people watched what we would shoot, they go, "Oh, that stuff looks so pirate. That's like so cool," because it was so different than anything that was on there. So but then once we went on the air, everybody just loved it.
Would you say that even if you're not that ready, as long as you start something, then you will work towards what you were set out to do?
Yeah, and and again, we started with the movie trailers, and I said, you know what? There's no difference between standing a host in front of a green screen and arm pointing to the screen and going, and Schwarzenegger has a movie. I said it's basically the same arm movement, but then once we're on the air, I mean, we grew to 14 countries in the first year, and then all of a sudden sponsors began to pay attention. So the first show we did. And people thought we were a little bit crazy. When I went and told the crew, I said, I want to do a TV show that makes fun of TV shows. And they were like, what? I go, I want to do a TV show that makes fun of TV shows. And they go, you can't do that. I'm going, yes, I can. It's like, we have the studio and we have the stuff and we're going to do it. So that first show was Talk Soup. And Talk Soup ran 26 years. And then the next one, I met a guy in an elevator in New York, and he was telling me that he's a big radio personality. And I'm like, yeah, okay, radio's dead 40 years, whatever. You want to think you're important. That's great. But I went and looked at his show, and, I came back and I told the crew, I said, I want to put cameras in this guy's radio studio. And they were like, Larry, they go, we thought you out of your mind when you wanted to do Talk Soup. Like, radio's dead. Like, why does anybody care about radio? I go, you don't understand. This is like a reality sitcom. I said, there used to be a TV show in America called WKRP in Cincinnati. And it was about people who worked at a radio station. It was some ensemble cast of characters. I said, this is the reality TV version of that. And that was Howard Stern. And, obviously Howard went on to do pretty well.
Where did you get your inspiration to come up with all these shows?
It's a good question. There's nothing in my background that points to it. I didn't go to film school or anything like that. And a lot of it is just something in the gut that you feel. And, growing up in that neighborhood, you learn to be a little bit resourceful and gritty. And and the only thing we could think of is, I mean, it's true. When my mother, God love her, she's gone now, she didn't have a lot of motherly instincts. So, in our apartment, she used to dress me on the kitchen table. So she put me on the table and put my clothes on and stuff. And then there was one time, where the phone rang and, my mother goes, stay there. And of course I fall off the table and landed on my head and broke my arm and stuff like that. So other than that, there's no reason for why my brain works the way it does.
You've always been ahead of the game, or a foot forward in front of everyone else in terms of innovation and technology and what you did with cable. What do you see now? What trends do you see that are happening now all over the world?
Well, I mean, everybody is, worried like Hollywood is dead. Hollywood's not dead. It's just changed. It used to be that, if you go back 100 years, if you wanted to make any kind of visual entertainment, you had to come to Hollywood. Why? Because you needed big sound stages, you needed expensive cameras and stuff. But as technology kept bringing down those barriers and stuff, I mean, I could take my cell phone today and go to Nigeria and make a movie on my cell phone. And the camera on my cell phone is better than the camera that used to cost me $250,000 back in the day I started. And so I think Hollywood has become not so much a geographic center, but it's basically a level of quality. It's a mindset of creativity and stuff. But you could make visual entertainment anywhere. And plus, audiences change. And, I think a lot of people get stuck in trying to deal with what was and maintain what was, as opposed to just look and go, you know what, technology marches on whether you like it or not. Let's focus on what will be as opposed to what used to be. And, that's been the big difference between the stuff that I've been involved in with other stuff. I mean, I look at the music business and, now they moan, they go, oh, we got messed up and, iTunes and Spotify control the music business. And I go, maybe it's because you spent 10 years fighting it, going, we're never going to let digital music happen and stuff. I said, if you would have embraced it then, you would have been iTunes, you would have been Spotify. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're seeing the same thing now with AI, where, SAG and the Writers Guild and everybody going, AI is going to replace us and stuff like that. It's going to replace the mundane jobs. And there's no way you're going to hold it back because it's an incredibly effective tool for creative people to be able to create without barriers to entry and without gatekeepers. And, it's going to happen. You could spend your time fighting it or you can embrace it and figure out, a lot of people are going to have to retrain on other jobs, but then there are going to be more jobs created. And then, for people, I was giving an example before, when I started, I had to type a script on a typewriter and I had a little bottle of whiteout. So if I made a mistake, I had to white it out and retype it and stuff like that. And then you had, word processing come. So what used to take me 3 months to do is now taking me five days to do. But now with AI, all the mundane stuff, my research, my creating the PowerPoint, the budgets, I do it all with AI, but then I spend a few hours like putting humanity into whatever it is I'm doing, because it doesn't work. It comes out 80%, it's never 100%. It needs that human touch. So, now it takes me 3 hours to do what used to take me 5 days, what before used to take me 3 months. I said, how do you not love that? I said, as human beings, we're here on this planet for an infinite, amount of time. I mean, all of us we're not going to be here in X amount of years. So how do you most effectively use your time? I said, if I could get paid for my 3 hours work, what I used to get paid for my 5 days work, I said, how do I not love that? I could either do more of it and make more money. I could spend time with my little grandbaby because I got one now, or I could learn how to speak Spanish, or I could go on a cruise. I mean, I've reclaimed the most valuable thing that we as human beings have, and that's our time. So I think our regulators need to catch up. I think right now everybody's afraid of it. I mean, the problem that you have with AI now is the people that create the laws and the regulations don't really understand it, and they think if they put their head in the sand, it'll go away. It doesn't go away. I mean, technology that has good application will make its way to the forefront. You need to have some guardrails so that bad people know that there are consequences for doing bad things. I mean, you can't just take an actor and, shoot him in one thing and then use his image in 10 other things. I mean, there are things called contracts, and if you violate the contracts, you have to pay penalties or go to jail. We need laws. I mean, the example I give a lot of people is, a 12-year-old can't come to me and say, hey, I want to drive the car, give me your keys. You got to be a certain age. You had to take a course. You had to pay attention to the rules of the road, or you lost your right to drive. I mean, we don't have anything in place that tells bad people you can't do bad things because you will pay a price for that. And that needs to catch up.
Going back to the idea of Hollywood, we all know now that Hollywood is no longer just a geographic location, right? With the idea of Hollywood now, what do you see happening to Hollywood with all these controversies happening and the lack of representation of Asians and other minority groups? Where do you see Hollywood going?
Well, I think you're seeing more and more. You're seeing stuff being done all over the world. I think if you take the case of Asians, and I work with a lot of Asian groups, I have a big company in China. You look at where Asian creative and talent was 10 years ago, and you look where it is today, it's dramatically different. I mean, so maybe it's taking longer than it should, but you're seeing the inclusion of more and more diversity into things. And, we got to ensure that continues, because ultimately you want to speak to an audience, and you look and say, you know what, the composition of the audience has changed. I better change the content and who I put in shows and how they're derived and who they appeal to and stuff. And I think, you still have a lot of people trying to hold on to the old, as opposed to go, you know what, 35% of the people in this country speak Spanish. Maybe we should be doing something in Spanish. There's a lot of adjustment that I say. You'll see regime change over time. I think you're seeing more minorities in the media world. Certainly you're seeing a lot more women in important positions now. And, so my advice to everybody is learn a new technology, because that's what's going to put you in those better positions. And if you're in those positions, you would then have the ability to force change.
And did you ever think that you had a higher calling after moving to California?
No, not really. I still don't. When people say to me, you're one of the biggest influences of pop culture in the world, yeah, I kind of laugh, because I look at it and go, okay, I figured out that people around the world love Hollywood celebrity and Hollywood gossip. It's not rocket science. Alan and I did execute it really well, and we were really smart about the way we did it. But it wasn't what I consider this revolutionary idea. And, once in a while, I realized the scope of that, and I started doing business in China. And my partner's explaining to me the Chinese government officials, and, I could see they have no idea what E is and stuff like that, until all of a sudden one of them goes, talk soup. I'm like, holy shit, somebody knows that stuff, what was supposedly one of my crazier ideas. But, when people say, what's your proudest moment? So financially, E obviously is, it's crazy how much it's worth. But I decided at this ripe old age that I'm funny. So I decided that I'm going to write comedy, but I'm going to write it in China for the Chinese audience. And people going, you can't do that. You didn't grow up in that country. You didn't grow up with that language. You didn't grow up in that culture. But I end up writing a comedy about the contradictions of modern Chinese life. It's what happens when you have incredible economic growth in a short period of time, and people's social skills don't grow as quick as their bank account. We've seen it. Just go to Rodeo Drive, and, there's the Russians buying all the Gucci scarves and stuff like that, And, in those kind of countries, it's like, if you have money, wear it. Gucci this and Prada that, pink Ferraris and stuff. So I wrote this comedy, and my partner in China, I have a woman partner in Beijing, she says, I really like the story. Could I take it to the TV station? And I said, yeah, sure. And, we go, she calls me up and says, I took it to Channel 8, which is the biggest TV station in China. And the guy really loves it, and he wants to meet the writer, and I arranged we'll have dinner tomorrow night. So, I'm sitting at the restaurant, and they come in, and, they're talking in Chinese, and I understand enough Mandarin to, he's saying to her, he goes, no, I wanted to meet the writer. This is a white guy. And I'm like, really, you think? And he goes, he switches to English. The guy went to Dartmouth. And he's like, no, he goes, I didn't mean any offense. He goes, but when I read it, I just thought it was written by someone Chinese. I never thought could be written by anybody other than Chinese. And he goes, but, we're Communist Party television. I can't put an American writer's show on TV. I went, okay, whatever. And so 2 weeks later, he calls back and says, I went to the propaganda department, because in China, they actually do have a propaganda department. And they know who you are, of course, and they really love the story, because it's all about finding balance in life. It's not rich is good or poor is good. It's like how people have to find their own happy place. And so they said, if we want to do it, it's okay. And, now it's on national TV in China. It's CCTV 8. They apologize because they only reach 1.1 billion people, not 1.3 billion people. And ends up the show goes 72 episodes. And I'm going, that's kind of cool. I mean, 70, and finally I stopped. I said, I can't be funny for more than 72. But the show gets nominated at the Asia TV Awards. And it's the only sitcom from China nominated. So when I look back, I go, you know what? That's actually, we didn't win. But I go, it's kind of cool that a kid from Brooklyn wrote the #1 comedy in China. So a proud moment on the creative side. It's more that, financially, obviously.
You mentioned something about finding your happy place. Now that you've accomplished a lot of things, whether it was involuntary or something that you really wanted to do on your own, what is your happy place now?
Oh, well, I still do a lot. I'm actually doing more than I wanted to. When COVID hit, I have a big company in China, and we do literally everything there. And but when COVID hit, they had such onerous restrictions on going there. You had to quarantine for 3 weeks in a Chinese hotel, and I wasn't about to do that. But then I said, okay, I got to be here, and the last thing in the world I want to do is learn how to play golf. So I started doing stuff here again, and I said, okay, I'll develop 5 or 6, new ideas, and maybe one of them will hit and stuff. But and I shouldn't complain. I think all 6 have hit, so I find myself like working probably more and harder than I've worked God knows how long. And most of the stuff I'm doing now is all got a social impact component to it. So creating stuff for a lot of the streamers, because you don't get a lot of creative ideas out of the studios anymore. And when you go and you have a new idea, they go, what's it like? And I'm like, it's not like anything. It's a new idea. They don't get it. But I did a series on financial wellness for millennials, because kids don't learn anything about life skills in school anymore. We did another one of it called Conscious Parenting, because being a parent in today's world is fairly complex compared to when I was born. And I have a nighttime talk show coming out in the spring with actually a woman host, because in the United States, all the nighttime talk shows are guys, and it's all the same show. It's like, so Tom Cruise, tell me about your next movie. So I found this gal, interesting story. 8 years ago, she was a homeless mom on the streets of London. 8 years later, she's living in Bel Air, and she's #1 female motivational speaker in the country. And she life coaches Will.i.am and Steve Aoki and folks like that. So we have a talk show that's going to be motivational, inspirational, as opposed to promotional. So she's more interested in people's relationships with their family and their kids and their friends and the planet and things like that. So that's a good one. And then I have a big show that's there's one woman that's ruled China, and so we found a book about her. So we're actually doing a big series. I can't tell you which network it's on because the contracts are still going through the legal thing, but it's about the first and only woman ever to rule China and stuff. And it's a big, it's like Game of Thrones set in China 1,200 years ago.
Speaking of books, you have a book that just came out, right?
Yeah. Oh, people have been after me to write the book for a long time, and I just refused. I said, look, my best work is ahead of me, not behind me. I don't want to write. But and this may sound a little weird, but my daughter had a baby. So now I have like one little grandkid. And my kids are interesting because my son is like my oldest son is exactly like his mom. 12 years of Catholic school, never told a lie. You can't get my son to do anything bad. You can't pay him to do something bad. My daughter, on the other hand, is like this little wise ass. She's kind of like me. She's got it all figured out. So I said, you know what? The last thing in the world I want is for my daughter to explain to my grandkid. I said, so I'm going to write the book so he could read it from like my words. And but since I'm 12, I cook because my parents both worked, and my if I didn't learn how to cook, I'd be eating peanut butter and jelly every night for dinner. And I've always loved it. And it's kind of my replacement for therapy. Everybody I know in this town goes to therapy and stuff like that. I go in the kitchen, I cook, and I can de-stress from anything. And so I realized that you could pretty much take my life, my career, and break it up into 8 parts. It's like my Brooklyn years, my Manhattan cable years, my Valley cable years, my E years, my Russia years, my China years, my post-COVID years. I said, so I could write the stories that happened during each period, but then I can match them with the recipes that inspired me during them. So the book is, it's somewhere between a memoir and a cookbook, because I put all the recipes in there.
That is so awesome. Do you intend to make it a show?
No, the last thing I want is to be in front of the camera. Again, I've up until COVID, I was pretty much of a hermit. And but with COVID, I said, I'm tired of being in the house. I'll get out more. I have no aspiration to be in front of the camera. I actually have a publicist that's been with me literally throughout my professional career. And she cracks up laughing, going, Larry, people pay me because they want to be on the cover of a magazine. You pay me to make sure you're never going to be on the cover of a magazine. I just don't want that. I don't need that. And,
What dish defines your life at the moment?
Well, chicken parmesan, the New York Italian, which is immigrant Italian, red sauce, or I'm really good at Chinese. And so if I'm dating a girl and I really want to impress her, I'll cook Chinese food.
What kind of Chinese food will you cook?
I'm really good at Cantonese. I'm good at Szechuan and stuff like that. So literally anything.
That is so awesome. Now I'm craving for something. Thank you so much for being with us today. We had such a wonderful time. I'm ecstatic and I'm really, really glad I learned so much from you today. Thank you so much. For anyone who wants to read your book called Off Script, where can they find it?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, Off Script by Larry J. Namer. And it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes, it's on Ingram, Spark, and stuff. So it's pretty easy to find.
Thank you so much. And to everyone out there, thank you so much for being with us today. And we'll see you in the next episode of Chat with Mick. Bye.
This episode is brought to you by Tang and Java. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out.